The idea for Nemesis actually came from Billy Murray. He'd seen a movie probably in the 60s when it came out called The Penthouse, which was directed by Peter Collinson, who did the Italian Job. And fortuitously, I'd seen it too. And so he'd suggested the idea of making a thriller set in a one location penthouse. And this was sort of a home invasion movie before there were home invasion movies. And we figured that by putting a sort of gangland spin on it, then we could make it more relevant to the genre.
We didn't want to do a remake at all. We wanted to put our own twist on that kind of story, home invasion. So I told Jonathan about it, and I kind of moaned about it for about 3 or 4 years, and he came up with the idea of it.
Adam and I have been friends and colleagues for a long time, at least a decade, and we work very kind of intuitively together. And he did the bulk of the writing on Nemesis and certainly wrote the script, but we worked very closely together. We spent weekends together, sort of concocting story ideas. And obviously he knew the actors we were going to cast, and he wrote to their strengths, which I think really shows.
I've known Adam Stephen Kelly, the writer of Nemesis, for a few years. He also wrote this role for me, so he wrote it knowing sort of my personality as well, which was really, really lovely. Adam has a very sort of dark, acerbic wit, which you can definitely see throughout this film because it is very dark, but yet it has that undertone.
We use the term morally ambiguous to describe Nemesis because it is. This is a movie with no clear-cut heroes and villains. There's no blacks and whites, there's just lots of greys. Billy's a terrible person in it, he's a human trafficker, but because he's so charismatic, you automatically think that he's the hero.
As an older actor, I was flattered that I was asked to actually play the lead in it. You don't usually get that. You get little character parts at my age. It was flattering to be offered the lead in this film.
The film was always intended as a vehicle for Billy. Billy's been my best friend for at least 10 years, and I think he's a remarkably underrated actor with real star quality, and he's such a powerful screen presence. And although we've made movies before, I never thought any of them really did him justice. And I was determined to make a movie that sort of, was a swan song in a way, because when we made the movie, Billy was adamant that he was going to retire and it was going to be his last movie. But he enjoyed it so much he's going to make more, which I think is good for everyone.
I've been a fan of Billy Murray all my life. He was always on the TV in incredible shows such as The Sweeney, The Professionals, Minder, Bergerac, McVicar, Don Beach from The Bill, and lest we forget, probably the greatest soap villain in TV history in Johnny Allen, EastEnders Johnny Allen. For me it was the most realistic portrayal of a TV gangster I think I'd ever seen. So much so that I modelled my office on Johnny Allen's in EastEnders. Huge hero of mine.
I've known Billy for years, and he is the nicest, most genuine guy you'll ever meet. He's so lovely. So working with Billy was just, it wasn't really work.
If Billy's career had gone differently and he'd moved to LA, I think he would have been in all the American gangster movies that he loves. He certainly has this De Niro type quality. He has a very dangerous stillness. And he's a remarkably handsome man. Irrespective of his age, he's still a head turner, and those dazzling blue eyes, are very, very distinctive, and he's exceptionally charismatic.
The guy is nearly 80 years old. I am 30 years younger than him, and yet we kind of look like we belong together. We don't look too much different in age. He looks amazing, and he really is, and everybody loves working with Billy.
I come from a place called Canning Town. It's the hub of the East End of London. That and Bethnal Green and Ilford and Plaistow. Lots of the characters around there have gone on to be famous or infamous. So yes, I have met so many different kinds of characters that I can draw from, and I still see them every day.
Well, I've been friends with Jonathan for about 10 years. I did a film with him called GBH, which was a film I was very proud of. And then we've been teetering around doing something for many years, and we sort of spoken about doing horrors before. and he called me up with this film which had sort of like a dark element to it, which was a bit horror-like. So he thought it might suit me. So he sent me over the script. I thought it was a really exciting script. It reminded me a bit of You're Next, The Purge, The Strangers, which had that sort of element to it. And I knew it would have a really good cast with him as producer. So we sort of went from there.
James brings a real horror movie sensibility. His background and his passion is kind of darker movies. And when we were thinking about directors for this project, I really liked that. He'd written a picture that I produced some years ago called Riot, about the London riots, and it was quite a dark drama. And I wanted to bring that. I didn't want a gangster sensibility. I wanted a kind of horror sensibility because the home invasion component of this film is very important. And I think he really nailed that.
I don't think I've worked with someone who's more passionate than James Crowe. And he directed it with passion.
We tried to make it very much look like a gritty drama. We spent a lot of time, me and Jonathan, talking about how we wanted it to sort of come across. So it's got that sort of gangster, gritty drama feel, but at the same time, the second half is much more sort of horror, high tension, thrillery. And I think it's an exciting movie because it's got those two elements to it in two parts, and I think it comes across really powerful in the film.
One of the things we're sort of constantly trying to do with these British gangster movies is make them into sort of proper films. It's very easy to just have movies that are set in sort of nightclubs and strip clubs and people shouting and swearing at each other and hitting each other with bottles. But we're trying to do something a little bit more sophisticated because, the audience for these movies is actually not stupid. They know what they like and they like quality and they recognise quality, and it's very hard to pull the wool over their eyes. When we were writing the script, we started out with Billy and Janine. We were always, their roles were very much written for them. And the other actor whose role was written for him was Nick Moran. I've been a massive fan of Nick since Lock, Stock, and over the years he's become a very good friend. And I've always thought that he's sometimes sidelined in these movies, and he's very clearly a leading man. He really is. Nick should be in much bigger movies. He's very charismatic and he's an exceptional actor. Be it on stage or on screen. He really is, the camera loves him and he brings real sort of power to his performances. And I think, what he does in this movie is he kind of runs the whole spectrum of emotions. He's tough, he's broken, he plays a drunk really well, which is very hard to do without resorting to cliche. And I think he's kind of the glue that holds the movie together, the dramatic glue. And the scenes that he does with Rupert Holiday-Evans and with Ricky Grover, in other hands they could become quite boring drama scenes, but you can't take your eyes off them. They absolutely crackle with intensity, and Nick really does hold the screen.
I was exceptionally pleased to know that Nick Moran was going to be in it. I've always admired his work. I loved him in Lock, Stock, and he's an in-depth actor. You know that he's thought about what he's going to say. He's a bit like that in real life, actually. I found him enlightening, easy to work with. I knew I had to learn my lines when I was with him because I knew he'd come on set with sort of mouthful of words, and I wouldn't if I wasn't careful. I liked him, and I like him as an actor.
I looked around the room and I saw Nick and thought, right, there's my man. I'm going to go up to Nick. I'm going to ask him some questions and how he thinks I should play this character. And Nick said, he was very calm, and he said to me, Dan, he said, I've been in the industry a long time, and sometimes less is more. And he gave me some direction on some of the slightly more physical scenes within that part of the film, and I took it on board, and his experience was invaluable because that turned out to be a pretty good scene.
Well, I feel very honoured that this role was specifically written for me. Being an older woman in the genre, it was just nice to have a role that wasn't a barmaid or in a strip club, or it was just really nice to actually get a proper part, to be acting with the main characters and the guys of because usually British gangster movies, it's all about the guys. So it was really nice. I mean, it really gave me my Helen Mirren feel of The Long Good Friday, and I was really, really honoured to do that.
I'm remarkably proud of her performance in the film. You know, for a new actress who came to acting late in life, to hold her own with actors of the quality and the pedigree of Billy Murray, Nick Moran, Frank Harper, Julian Glover, Bruce Payne, all of these people who, had she not been so good, would not have treated her as an equal. You know, it's a real cliche to be the producer's wife or the producer's girlfriend, and if you can't do it, you will get found out very quickly. And there are a lot of people that try and fail. Janine is not one. She's a bloody good actress, and she absolutely deserves to be in that film.
There is a scene in this film where I don't have many clothes on. I mean, some people would be quite shocked at that, and some people would probably want me to put some on, and some people would be quite happy with that. The reason why I did this scene was because, you know, I'm nearly 50, I've got 4 kids, I'm really proud of my body, and, you know, it was part of the film. You know, we didn't have a strip club to go and visit, and, you know, commercially these films need an element of nudity in them. The scene where my daughter's girlfriend walks in on me and catches me with that sort of element of surprise. I mean, all women, you know, when we're getting ready, we walk around with no clothes on, and, you know, that's how it is. I think it's a very natural scene, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that scene. I think it's definitely part of the film, and I think it's a really lovely scene between me and Zoe, who is my daughter's girlfriend in it, and the uncomfortableness, but yet how Sadie in the film is meant to be a very strong character, and she's so strong and yet so vulnerable when she's sort of crept up on and not expecting it. So I think it really shows a different vulnerability in Sadie in the film.
Janine, who played opposite me as my wife, who is actually my friend's wife, and we're all friends in real life, if you like. I was very impressed with her. I mean, she's a very brave woman. There's a scene in that film that you have to be brave to do it, and I don't know how she approached it, but she succeeded in it. It was good without it being. It was so natural, so normal, and she took it in her stride. I was very impressed with her. I think she's got many places to go in this film business.
Frank Harper is one of the most natural actors in Britain. You know, he's favoured by all of the great sort of realist directors, and that's what he brings to the gangster movies as well, is this sort of gritty realness. You know, he seems like the dangerous guy down the pub, because that's kind of what he is. But he's a remarkable actor, and we always like the idea of having him in this movie right from the start. I wasn't sure if he'd do it, because he's very picky. You know, when we shot the movie, he hadn't made a film since St George's Day, which he also directed. And he doesn't just turn up and let you use his face on the poster. You know, he really has to engage and care. And like Bruce, you know, Frank and I had long conversations about the script. And he came on board and he got it. And, you know, he delivered the performance that I think perhaps we weren't expecting. He was more flamboyant and more sort of, you know, big with it. He wanted to do something different. And I think it really worked. There's a real contrast between Billy's kind of dangerous stillness and calmness, and Frank being overconfident and, you know, full of his own importance. And that's obviously why Billy comes out on top in their sort of sibling rivalry.
I was delighted to find that I was going to be working opposite Frank Harper. Frank Harper's been a friend of mine since we did Rise of the Foot Soldier 1, about 14 years ago. I admire him as an actor, and he comes across very powerful in this.
Bruce Payne is one of the great Hollywood villains. Everyone knows him from Passenger 57, and, you know, all those bad guy roles, Warlock, Highlander, The Howling, Dungeons and Dragons. And when we were thinking about the character of Damien Osborn, that's what we wanted. We wanted him to be the big bad, and Bruce really is the big bad. You know, he's a really sort of stylish, flamboyant actor. And he really cares. You know, Bruce put a lot of thought into that role, and he and I talked about the costume for days, and the cigars and the, you know, all of that stuff. He really thought about it. Bruce is definitely not a take the money and run type actor. He committed to that one scene the way he would commit to a lead role in a Hollywood movie. And Bruce did a very interesting thing, which I've never seen before. He and Billy Murray had never met, and he didn't want Billy to meet him before the scene. And he really did push not to even say hello to him. And Billy was getting wound up and thinking, why does this guy not want to meet me? And I knew what he was doing, but it's very hard to explain. And eventually, when they met, it was the crackling electricity of these two sort of acting titans coming together, and the resentment was clearly there. And Billy said to Bruce afterwards, what you did was really smart and really clever. And that's Bruce. He's a pro. He's the ultimate pro.
It was written first of all for a Russian, and we changed that because we found we could get Bruce Payne, so we accommodated his character to fit him. And he comes with a reputation of a very powerful reputation, and I found his approach a bit unnerving because he didn't want to meet me. He didn't want, because we have to have an altercation, if you like, and he didn't want to meet me. He wanted it to be fresh. So I was left hanging around for 2.5 hours, spitting on the floor every time his voice was, his name was mentioned. But it worked. We went in there and we did it, and we were word perfect in the first take. We didn't do many takes. We did, I think, 3, 4 altogether. And he contributed a great deal to that film, and I'm in debt to him.
The Bruce Payne scene, which I said was one of my favourite. I mean, it was also because Bruce is like a real method actor, and Billy's more like a let's go and get on with it actor. But he made Billy wait around for like 2.5 hours, and it was getting quite tense. But that really helped with the scene, because when they both got together in the room, it was really electrifying, which was probably the way it was. But they were both good sports, and afterwards, they show what great professional actors they are.
Billy is a trooper. The man was 79 years old when we were filming this movie, in the cold and the rain. And the day we did the car explosion, he was waiting around for hours, and he never complained. And he really set the example for how people should conduct themselves. And it wasn't difficult. He didn't have a big jacket on. He was wearing the costume that you saw in the movie. He was in a foot of mud. There was explosions going off behind him, and he didn't blink. And that's Billy. He doesn't blink. That's his. Well, he blinks a lot in the movie, but generally speaking, he doesn't blink.
That day, it just took hours, and Billy stood there. I remember holding an umbrella over, some of the crew and stuff, and we were all standing there in like a foot of mud, and Billy just went on and just did it, sliding and skidding all over the mud. But I mean, as you will see in the film, when the car explodes and he kind of puts his hands up and he claps like this and he kind of cheers, it was like, I kind of know why he's cheering, because we were just so glad that it blew up, because that was the second attempt, the second day. But he just got on with it, never complained. Everybody else did.
The car explosion that we did failed the first time round because it was raining and muddy and everything else. So we had to go back to it and redo it all over again. But again, it was about 2 foot of mud. You can see me. What we didn't, we should have put a line in there somewhere, like, Daddy, how the fucking hell did you get us to this location? We could have bombed him somewhere else, but we didn't. But it looks like I'm stumbling, and in actual fact, I'm walking through about 18 inches of mud. The car explosion actually took me by surprise. I didn't think it was going to be that powerful.
The car explosion was an experience. We was in a lot of mud. And the cast were fantastic, because they had to put up with so much. We had rain, everything hit us. We had to even do it again because of the rain. But when we finally got it, it was really worth it, because it was such a big explosion. It really took me back as well as Billy, I think.
One of my favourite scenes in Nemesis is actually one that I'm not in. It's the Ricky Grover and Nick Moran scene. Ricky Grover plays a barman that Nick goes back to see, and Ricky Grover's character knows Nick's dad from many years ago and knew Nick when he was growing up. and it's just a really beautifully shot scene. It really is acted so well by Nick. I literally hang on to every word that he says, and the music, the score in that is brilliant. The whole film has been scored, and the music is fantastic all the way through. But this particular scene, it really is wonderful.
The role that Ricky Grover played is really a cameo, and I was very grateful that he came and did it. He's an old friend, and it's a very important role because it allows us to tell the story of Nick Moran's history with Billy's character. And it would be very easy to get a kind of, a smaller actor to come in and do that, because then it would just be one-way traffic in the scene. But Ricky makes it two-way traffic. He's a remarkable actor, incredibly subtle, nuanced, brings a real kind of grit and an intelligence to a role like that. Playing the barman is easy, but playing it brilliantly and making the role resonate is unusual. And Ricky certainly did that, and we were very, very lucky to have him in the movie.
The thing that really sort of held us back whilst making the film, prolonged it if you like, was the pandemic. It was almost impossible. We obeyed every rule. It was suffocating, actually, having to do it and then whip your mask off and then act and then put it back on again. The pandemic is a fucking nuisance.
Shooting during the pandemic created its whole own set of problems, with the social distancing and the masks making communications difficult, the constant checking of temperatures and COVID tests and all those things. But we managed to pull it off. Of course, there are things that we would have done differently had we not shot during the pandemic, but I think given what we achieved in a remarkably small amount of time, and in those trying circumstances, the film holds up incredibly well. One of the things that Adam and I talked about was originally was having no clear moral kind of compass for any of the characters in this. When we were writing it, we were right in the middle of the Trump administration, and here's a guy who's the biggest loser in the world, but he's also the biggest winner in the world. And we thought, this is it, we're writing a gangster movie for the Trump generation, and I think we pulled that off in the movie. The scene at the end where Billy gets his girls to come and hold down Lucy and help, and the family strangle her together, is a very important scene, and it shows that actually, they're not the heroes, they're actually really bad people. And when Adam first came up with this idea, I wasn't sure. I thought, 3 people strangling one, it doesn't sound quite right. But he was absolutely right. And when poor old Nick, was laying on the floor watching this happen, because he was dead in the scene, and he came to me afterwards and he said, you know what, when I read it, I didn't understand the script. I didn't get what the moral point of it was, and I thought the girl should have won at the end. But when I watched the 3 of them killing her, I understood what it is. There are no good people in this movie.